All calories are equal. Myth or true?
Part of me wants to say it's true, but I also know like it's not. In terms of carb v carb, carb has sugar, carb also has sugar. I think it's generally gonna do the same damage, but there's nutrients in this, food dye in this. So they're not equal in terms of health, but in terms of calories, they are equal. Like this is 110 calories of Sour Patch, 110 calorie apple. It is equal.
When it comes to weight loss, they would actually be the same. Your body responds to calories in versus calories out. If you eat in a caloric deficit, you will lose weight. But the problem is, you're so much more likely to overeat on this. Practical good takeaway from this is if you eat a little junk food, as long as it fits within your caloric targets for the day, it's okay. I'm okay with going half myth on this one. I think your intuition was right on that one.
Okay, Jay, so we're back with framing everything in this simplistic, narrow lens of calories being just calories. Can you talk more about maybe how an apple and, were those gummy worms? Sour gummy worms?
I think it was Sour Patch Kids.
Okay, Sour Patch Kids. Can you talk about some of the effects we'd expect? Maybe basing a meal around something that's like apple and meat based, and maybe like meat and gummy worms, Sour Patch Kids.
I think it's a great example. I think it was like, they picked a really good example here to center this around and ignore what's really at the core of the question. And they kind of skirted around the question a little bit too, it was kind of funny to see the way they answered it, right? It was like, the question was like, are all calories equal? And, he picks up the apple and says, well, this has 110 calories, and picks up the Sour Patch Kids and says, well, this has 100% calories. So they're equal because they have the same number of calories. But that's not the question here. The question is, are they equal in terms of their effects despite having the same number of calories? That's what we're trying to get at here. It's not, do they have the same number of calories? It's, are those calories equivalent in terms of their effects? And then we get into this apple and Sour Patch Kids question, and it's like, they'll both do the same damage because they have sugar. The sugar is going to do the same damage in both cases. But apples have nutrients, whereas Sour Patch Kids have food dye. So on a health standpoint, they're different. And I don't know if Jeff was intentionally avoiding that part of the question of talking about whether there's a difference in health, because he only responded at least in this clip, which was obviously cut from the original video. The response was only in regard to weight loss. I'd be curious to know if he just totally skirted around the question of whether there's a difference in terms of health, but not weight loss. He did mention that the difference would come because the Sour Patch Kids are more likely to make you eat more, which is always what they default to. But I would love to kind of drill down and actually know whether he thinks that there's literally no difference in terms of health between the two because they're equivalent in calories. But in any case, when we're actually talking about the differences there, I think it's even this simplified, well, one has food dyes and one has nutrients, is also getting at how, that is not everything here in terms of the differences between apples and Sour Patch Kids. And I know that wasn't necessarily their take, is like, let's compare and contrast these two things. But this idea that both are going to cause damage because of the sugar, sounds like, we had a little bit of Robert Lustig, peeking his way through here, sharing that piece. But you have this beneficial effect of nutrients in apples is missing so much. So when it comes to apples, we do have beneficial effects in terms of micronutrients. We also have some fiber in there and polyphenols, and both of those have a number of benefits too, and have anti-inflammatory effects and benefits on the gut and all the rest. But also, it's nowhere near as simple as just because it has more nutrients, it is healthier, and because the Sour Patch don't, they're not healthier. Obviously, food dyes aren't great, we want to avoid those, but I think it just shows the lack of nuance here, because for some people, I would argue that an apple could be worse than Sour Patch Kids.
That was my thought. Yeah.
Yeah. If they have a major bacterial issue, let's say, they have SIBO, they have problems with digestion, and you're eating a really high FODMAP food in an apple, feeding bacteria, you're getting bloating, gas, endotoxin, that could be worse than the Sour Patch Kids. And, we talked about the sugar diet in those last couple of episodes, and I think that's part of why a lot of people had benefits on it, was they were cutting out a lot of potentially irritating foods, even though it could have included, that they were still eating apples. But I think what we're seeing here very clearly is a lack of depth in terms of really getting at what's important to understand in terms of differences between foods. And that is, again, one of the biggest disservices of this calories in, calories out method and approach, and what people are sharing, is that people are going to walk away from this clip and say, as long as I have the same number of calories and I don't overeat from eating the Sour Patch Kids, doesn't matter. Literally doesn't matter. And it's such a disservice. And obviously, I think something that we see with the people who are of this belief and kind of like Layne Norton-esque people, and of course Layne Norton himself, is that they would see so quickly how much that isn't the case if they worked with the type of clients that we work with. Like you could never take on that belief if you were seeing what we see. Like I think, the type of people they're working with are just, I want a six pack, I want to lose weight, whatever it is. But when people are dealing with the severe health issues that we see, I mean, you could never get away with this idea that there's no difference between these outside of the number of calories that they have. Like you wouldn't get anywhere. So I do have some other thoughts here that I'd like to share, but I'll let you hop in, Mike, because I'm sure you have a lot to say too.
So the biggest piece is just this focus on calories, as if they're not an abstract concept that just gives us an estimate of food intake. So when we look back and we look at the actual true definition, we see the amount of energy needed to raise 1 milliliter of water by 1 degree Celsius. So the calories between Sour Patch and an apple are the same. Yeah, they're exactly the same calories. But this is an abstract average, a way to gauge energy, and nothing else about the food. So the question, and you got to this point, Jay, is the question is, are there different effects of Sour Patch and apple on the body if the calories were kept completely the same? And the answer is yes, there are different effects. There's 100% different effects between both of those foods. And it's contextually dependent, as you guys pointed out. If somebody had issues digestively, maybe the FODMAPs and the imbalanced glucose to fructose ratio on the apple wouldn't be ideal. But when you're looking at a food, calories is like the most basic surface level thing to understand. Say, okay, it's roughly this much energy. That's it. After that, we want to know what's the macronutrient breakdown. What's the nutrient density of the food? How does that food impact the GI tract? How does it impact the microbiome? What are its effects on the hormonal profile? What's its effects on inflammation, the immune system, on the circulatory system, etc.? So instead of just focusing entirely on, well, as long as you have an appropriate energy balance in terms of calories in, calories out, in terms of weight, we want to look at this middle piece that's adjusting calories in, calories out, and that is adjusted by the specific food itself. Because when you take in a food, it's not just calories in, right? You're not just getting an input of calories and you have an output of calories. Like you can't account for things in this sense, and that's one of the things that we talk about. What you're looking at is you have to first digest that food. So you have to break it down, then you have to absorb it, then it has to move through the liver, be processed by the liver, then it has to be circulated, and then it has to be oxidized effectively in the mitochondria inside the cells, or added to structural components, or converted into signaling molecules, a variety of different things. So when you think about it in this sense, and you start making arguments around, well, are all calories equal? It's like, it's completely irrelevant conversation to even have. It doesn't even make sense to go there when you actually look at how a food is processed and what's going on in the body with that food. And then even when we think about it long-term from a weight loss perspective, if you ran your diet, which I know Jeff is not saying this, so I'm not strawmanning him, but just to put this as an exaggerated example, if you ran your diet on pure Sour Patch, and then long-term, you're like, well, it's just calories in, calories out, because this is the extension that I think a lot of people make, right? And there's done studies where you had a professor just eat Twinkies and garbage, whatever, and he still lost weight. The question is, if you run these foods long-term, what happens to your microbiome? What happens to your digestive tract? What happens to your liver? What happens to your micronutrient status? What happens to your vascular system? What happens to your hormonal profile? So it's like, yeah, after a period of time, like the calories in, calories out stuff doesn't work anymore. So as you pointed out, Jay, if you're somebody who's dealing with significant health problems, not just I want to lose a couple pounds, but you really have some stuff going on, you can't just look at calories anymore. It's not going to get the job done. It's not going to provide the outcomes that you're looking for. For me, I look at calories just as a gauge of energy intake. So to make sure I don't have some, like I spoke with a lady last night. She came into the program. She had done a protocol and they had her doing intermittent fasting with 2 meals a day. And the meals were 4 ounces of protein, 4 ounces of fruit, and then some vegetables. And she's like, I lost a bunch of weight. And I'm like, okay, but you ate 600 calories a day. You're on almost a protein sparing modified fast. And she's like, well, I went to the dentist and my bones, they're not as good. They said maybe a little bone loss. Like, yeah, because this is where calories are helpful, to see where you're at in terms of energy intake based on roughly where you should be. But beyond that, like there's nothing else it's really telling you. So focusing on this is like very surface level. I think it's not helpful to like hone in on this so much and get into all these arguments, because I think we can de facto say apple and Sour Patch have vastly different effects on the body. And yes, the calories are the same, but that's irrelevant. That's I think the key takeaway for me. So deflecting to the weight loss question, I think is unimportant. I think the biggest thing is like the overall health effect of the different foods. The other thing here that I would say was like snuck in there was what you pointed out, Jay, which was the sugar is damaging piece.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is like inherent, it's implied. It's like you assume that principle because Jay says, well, the sugar is both damaging, and then he makes a reasonable argument. So then you conflate, okay, well, yeah, well, this guy's reasonable, so sugar must be damaging. But sugar is not damaging. If anything, when we look at it, sugar or carbohydrate oxidation is what we want to be doing on a consistent basis. And we have to oxidize some fuel sources, right? Because you can't just get all your calories in protein. We know that. So you're going to have to use carbs. You're going to have to use fat. So to just say, well, sugars, carbohydrates are damaging, I think completely misses the point. And when you look at the mechanisms, you see the change in the NAD plus NADH ratio. You see the change in the CO2 production compared to fats. You see the decreased ROS production inside the mitochondria, the better utilization of oxygen with more ATP produced per unit of oxygen. You see the lowering of the stress hormones, and you see the increased conversion to active thyroid hormones. You start to say, well, maybe sugar isn't so toxic after all. Maybe sugar actually has beneficial effects all together through multiple mechanisms. And we want to get enough carbohydrates in our diet so that we can function appropriately. And we want to choose foods that allow us to get our carbohydrate needs with adequate nutrients that don't have industrial additives like Sour Patch, that have beneficial effects on the microbiome, and that can actually restore metabolism and don't tag the liver or the circulatory system or trigger inflammation in any type of negative way. So for me, those are more the questions that I'd be thinking about instead of, are all calories the same? All calories are the same, but all foods are not. And calories, it's just an arbitrary way to measure two things. I think a good example of this is, do a boat and do a piece of bread do the same thing? Oh, they don't? But I can equivocate loaves of bread in monetary amounts to a boat. And I'm not going to be able to understand what the function of a boat or a piece of bread is. So calories are the same thing when you're looking at foods. They're just a fungible unit that allows us to compare energy intakes and nothing else around those foods, which brings us, that goes to the weekend piece you're talking about. 3,000 calories of vodka and McDonald's is not going to be the same of 3,000 calories of, good grass-fed meat, fruits, juices, stuff like this. Now, I don't think any of us are saying or trying to straw man Jeff here or Jesse and say that they are saying those same things, but the line of argumentation that they are making, if people extrapolate that downstream, those are the types of things that get perpetuated, where you see that guy before this, I don't know what his name is, but where you see that guy before this just breaking everything out into this accounting metric where I can just reduce my expenditures throughout the week, or reduce my inputs throughout the week so I can smash a high input on the weekend. That's where things go when you start making argumentation in this line and not getting to the fundamental premise of what a calorie is from the get-go and then what that even means for the foods. So when you miss that point, then you get these weird extrapolations. And I think that's why we want to address these clips so that we don't have people doing this. The last thing I want to say is, in the bioenergetic sphere, I do see people saying, well, calories don't matter at all. And I push personally, at least, you guys may feel separately from me, but I push back on this a little bit because I think it's helpful to have a way to at least try to gauge food intake, just roughly. So I know where you're at. So I know you're not in a huge surplus and it's like, I'm eating 5,000 calories a day and I'm gaining weight. What's going on? So I can at least see that. And also I'm eating 600 calories a day and I feel terrible and, I'm losing muscle tissue. What's going on? So I like to see it from that perspective. But beyond that, like, it's not really that. There's nothing else that you can gain or glean from that. After that, it's all the other components. And yeah, this is where the energy toxicity things, yeah, like you can say somebody will develop metabolic issues from pushing like really high caloric intakes on a consistent basis over time. They're gaining tons of body fat from doing that. That will happen. But, most people's problems aren't that they just plowed 5K calories every day for an extended period of time. Most people are dealing with other things related to other components of food. So I would keep that into perspective. I'm making this point because what you talked about with Lane J, where it's like, oh, everything's just energy toxicity. And it's like, it's such a basic theory that is so easily, number one, corrected, and number two, is not most people's problems, that it's just like even insane to try to like centerpiece that for people's issues, especially again, when we look at what calories actually show us about individual foods.
It's definitely a simplified perspective if someone's only thinking about, okay, let's tailor everything for weight loss. But as Jay mentioned, most people are in pretty abysmal shape, and it's, they don't have the luxury of having this oversimplified view. Jay, what were you going to add before we jumped back?
Well, I mean, definitely a number of things that Mike mentioned. And I think one that we're getting at here is this separation that they have between weight loss and health, which for one is, the vast majority of people we're working with are people who were dieting without regard to their health, right? It was orienting their diet and lifestyle toward weight, not toward health. And they end up in such rough situations. They end up destroying their health in the process due to this sort of advice. Yep. And then you end up having to face the reality that weight and health are inextricably linked, obviously. It's not like you have this one little organ in your body that's just the calorie calculator, and then there's everything else. It's like there's so much going on with I don't even want to say nutrition. It goes so far beyond nutrition. It's nutrition and sleep and stress and all of the rest. And obviously the nutrients and the polyphenols and your digestion and your thoughts, and all of those affect not only health, but also weight loss. And I think what we should be, the way that I like to frame it at least, is that weight loss should be a byproduct of improving our health as opposed to the primary goal. And when we have weight loss as our primary goal, it typically ends up coming at the cost of our health. And then we end up with a short-term fix, short-term weight loss that leads to not long-term sustainable or physiologically sustainable weight loss because we end up regaining it, but then B, also other health problems as a result. So I think that's the biggest issue I see with that sort of framework. I mean, you heard it here. Jeff was saying, your body responds to calories in versus calories out. And at that point, we're just coming back to that same first clip. Like that is the exact same framework that we're having. And it's like, so your body doesn't respond to any other inputs in your environment. It literally just responds to calories. That's the complexity of our view. That's what we think the human body is. It's insane. It's so insane. So yeah, I mean, I think that we want to consider how the other aspects of our environment affect gut health, inflammation, mitochondrial function. And when we account for those things and we eat a diet that is healthy and has the proper amount of fuel, which yes, we measure with calories because that is the best measure that we have for it. And that's fine. It's good for that. That's how it's useful. But we do that and we correct the other aspects of our lifestyle and we can improve our health and see weight loss. And that's, I think, the goal here. And again, to also phrase it as overeating or energy toxicity are really where the problem is at. And that's just caused by how palatable food is, right? That's why the Sour Patch Kids are going to cause you to overeat. It's because they taste better. Again, ignores all of the factors that affect our hunger signals. And we've talked about these ad nauseum, but if just to like keep it really simple, if there's a nutrient deficiency and you're not converting, let's say it's a B1 deficiency, and so you're not converting your carbohydrates effectively, into energy, into ATP, and so the hypothalamus in your brain has a lack of ATP, and you ate a lot of food, so it's supposed to turn your hunger signals off, but there's a lack of ATP there, so it doesn't, and then you have the signal to keep eating, and so you keep eating, and then you blame the number of calories coming in as if those are the problem. And we're then missing that not only was what we were eating or not eating interfering with our ability to produce energy and turn the hunger signals off properly, but also that has effects on so many other factors: testosterone levels, thyroid levels, cortisol, and the rest, which all then affect body composition and affect your tendency to overeat, quote unquote, overeat. So yeah, I mean, I think that's my broad concerns with it all. I did want to come back to one thing that you mentioned, Mike, which is some people saying like this idea that calories don't matter. And, I think it's a really imprecise statement. And normally what people mean by that is the amount of food that you eat doesn't matter. I mean, I'm assuming that's like the suggestion is that the amount of food you eat doesn't matter. I obviously think that that's as crazy as saying that the nutrients don't matter. Like the amount of food matters a lot. The amount of potential energy in the food that you consume is really, really important. It makes a huge difference on how much energy you can potentially produce. If you're not effectively producing energy, how much you might store. I mean, it obviously matters a lot. So yeah, I think that's just a consequence. You see that in every camp other than Seco, of course. Like you see that in the low carb sphere as well. And I think I think on one hand, sometimes it's people just saying things as they often do. But I think there's also an aspect of truth in the idea that we shouldn't have to excessively focus on calories if, like, when we get to a better state of health where we don't need to calculate our calories for the week and then make sure that we're staying at the exact amount every day. It kind of sorts itself out in a lot of cases. But in the process of getting there, knowing how much you're eating can be really, really helpful. So, so I don't think we would want to ignore that, and telling people that calories don't matter, so you shouldn't even consider the amount you're eating, is definitely a disservice as well. If you enjoyed that clip, you'll definitely want to download the free Energy Balance Food Guide. The Energy Balance Food Guide will help you determine exactly what to eat to optimally support your metabolism and help you lose weight, improve your digestion, get amazing sleep, boost your energy, and so much more. The food guide makes it extremely easy to get started with a bioenergetic approach to optimizing your health. So head over to jfeldmanwellness.com/guide to download your free Energy Balance Food Guide.